All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. I have a special guest on today. We have Ed Kressy. Ed is a really interesting guy. He's had a lot of opportunities in life: college education, career with Genentech, home ownership in San Francisco. Yet he threw it all away to 2 decades of drug addiction. He spent months in jail and years in destitution. His final 11 years of addiction to methamphetamine resulted in harrowing psychosis, including extreme paranoia around the FBI. After getting clean in 2008, he discovered just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. He continued to battle severe mental health challenges. Fortunately, amazing individuals inspired him to pursue a path of self-improvement, spirituality, and service to others. In 2019, FBI Director Christopher Wray recognized him with his Director's Community Leadership Award. His inspiring transformation is the subject of his upcoming book, My Addiction and Recovery. Just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. His articles appear in the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Vox. He's appeared on stage for the Moth. He volunteers for the FBI and police department in his hometown of San Francisco, helping their outreach to communities affected by incarceration and addiction. Ed, I could keep going, but I think that was a little bit to start us off.
That
Welcome to
was
the
beautiful.
show.
Thank you, Toby. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, from what I've read about your story, I mean it's quite fascinating. Would you be able to kind of give our listeners just a little idea of kind of, what sort of transpired in your life that kind of led to you getting to that very low point?
Sure. Well, a lot of things happened. It goes back to, for a lot of us who struggle with addiction, the way I struggled for 2 decades, it often goes back to childhood. I had a lot of opportunities in life, as you so kindly mentioned. I was always a bullied kid. I was ostracized. I felt ostracized. I was picked on. I couldn't fit in with the cliques of popular kids. I was afraid to stand up for myself on the playground. One of the first ways I felt like I could connect with people my own age was through writing. Because I learned to read. My house was full of books when I was a kid. So I learned how words should look on the page. I developed a love of reading. Part of it was I loved to escape into fantasy worlds. The world of fantasy to me was always much more attractive than reality. When I was a kid, some of the first times I felt really empowered were when the English teacher would call me to the front of the room to read aloud a story I had written. And these were the times I felt like I was bringing something to the world around me. These were some of the first times as a young adult. What happened, unfortunately, was I found a faster way and a seemingly easier way to get those same feelings of confidence through drinking. I got drunk for the first time when I was 14, really drunk for the first time when I was 14. I became a heavy drinker at age 16. I went to college early at age 17, started getting into drugs, cocaine, marijuana. I would dabble in psychedelics. I did a lot of ecstasy, all of it to tamp down the negativity I felt towards myself because I never pursued my dream of being a writer. There were other reasons too, but a main reason is I had this dream since I was a kid. Instead of pursuing the dream, which was being a writer, I pursued things like a career, a home, a motorcycle, relationships. Nothing wrong with any of it, nothing wrong at all. But when I use those things as substitutes for my dream, that's when I developed the negativity, or that's maybe a reason I failed to address the negativity I felt towards myself from being that bullied, ostracized kid. I projected negativity to the world around me. I buried it all under an avalanche of drugs. Eventually, all the things I mentioned, the home, the career with Genentech, the life savings, my beloved dog, all my relationships, I threw it all away and much more. I was in a point of methamphetamine psychosis. I spent a total of 11 years addicted to meth. I was smoking it every day. I believed in these vast FBI conspiracies that were targeting me because I had inadvertently befriended a 9/11 hijacker. This was my life. That world of fantasy I got from books, I made terrifyingly real as a result of my methamphetamine psychosis. I heard disembodied voices threatening to come and kidnap me and torture me to death. I believe the FBI architected a conspiracy to pin 9/11 on me and put me in prison for the rest of my life. My family and friends were all in on it. There were pictures of me in Sports Illustrated swimsuit magazine, doctored pictures to send me a message of fear. I would go months without showering or brushing my teeth. I toted a loaded .357 pistol as protection against people I thought were after me. Toby, I could go on and on. This basically from the point of a privileged Caucasian male in America, given almost every opportunity, poor decisions related to my failure to develop the confidence in pursuing my dream. And I became, in 2007, at the point where for years I had been little other than a drain on society. I was draining the resources of law enforcement. I drained the resources of the court system. I drained community resources. I frightened the citizens because I was shambling the sidewalks and lurking in doorways, having screaming matches with people who weren't even there. You know, I basically took a lot of opportunities and transformed them to a point where I was just taking and taking and taking, and I was a very negative influence on society.
And what was the point of bottoming out?
Yeah, that was like a 3-year point.
Okay.
There were a lot of points. You know, I remember once I spent a couple of nights in a homeless shelter. I was never homeless for long term, but I remember one night everybody was in the homeless shelter smoking cigarettes. Some enterprising man was selling cigarettes for 25 cents. I had 3 quarters in my pocket. I pulled out a quarter, and as I was smoking my cigarette, I realized I had just spent 1/3 of my entire net worth on a single cigarette. You know, because that 3 quarters, that was all I had to my name, and I just spent 1/3 of that on a single smoke. The real bottom came in October of 2007 when I was living in a flophouse hotel. There was a little sink in the corner where I would ash my cigarettes, wash my clothes, and urinate. This was at the point where I hadn't showered or brushed my teeth in months. The only clothes I owned just about was this filthy tuxedo, because I'd worked in the strip clubs in the North Beach area of San Francisco. The strip clubs even treated me well. You know, they gave me a chance, and I made them pay for it. You know, I was a terrible employee. I stole from them. I showed up high to work. So all I really had left in life was this filthy tuxedo. I was being evicted from my hotel room. I was going into long-term homelessness or incarceration, or if I was lucky, those things, or the grave. You know, my choices were really down to 3. I could get locked up, I could get covered up, like 6 feet of earth covered up, or I could get sobered up. Those were really my only options. I wore this filthy tuxedo to a fancy hotel in downtown San Francisco. I went to the bar and somebody set down a drink and walked away. I picked up the drink and knocked it back. I found myself at the threshold of a hotel ballroom. Inside the ballroom, a wedding reception was taking place. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm standing there in my filthy tuxedo thinking I'm going to crash this wedding reception, you know, blend in, eat at the buffet, get a drink, and, you know, make up some story. As I'm standing there, something in my mind clicks. I realize that in the few years previous to my being in that hotel ballroom, 5 weddings had taken place. These were 10 of my closest friends. One couple had asked me to be the best man. And Toby, do you know how many of those weddings I showed up to out of the 5?
None?
0, exactly. 10 of my closest friends had gotten married. I didn't show up to a single wedding, not even to be the best man after I was asked. In addition to that, I'd been hearing these disembodied voices for years. I consider the voices my spouse. I would consider myself married to these disembodied voices. Something inside me clicked that when I went home that night, I smoked the last of my meth. I smoked the last of my marijuana. The very next day, I got up, I started working incredibly hard. I began going to 12-step meetings, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 a day. I began pursuing a path of spirituality. I was never a spiritual person, but I began considering that there might be something called a God or a higher power or a universe or a great spirit, whatever label we choose to put on that force, should we choose it exists. I began to consider that force might be out there for me. And I began to put my faith and my trust in a pursuit of that force, which I've still 12 years later, I probably understand that force less today than I did back then. But that belief, that faith in a higher power got me out of some very dark circumstances. I worked incredibly hard at improving myself. I became a volunteer. I volunteered for soup kitchens, for the Red Cross, for the SPCA, wherever I could apply myself to bettering the people around me, meaning feed a homeless person a meal or help someone who had experienced a loss due to a disaster, via the Red Cross. Anywhere I could be of service, of some use, that's what I would do. I got mentors, I got AA sponsors, I connected with spiritual advisors, rabbis, Zen practitioners, meditators. Toby, I just worked incredibly hard for years and years. What I discovered, among other things, is that just because you're done with drugs doesn't mean drugs are done with you. So I continue to experience a form of psychosis. And even to this day, I hear disembodied voices.
I was gonna actually, that was gonna be the next thing I was gonna ask, as far as being able to sort of shift into all of this kind of self-improvement while you were still battling this kind of severe mental illness, and as you're saying, still hearing those voices. How are you able to do that?
I was able to do that because amazing people and amazing organizations gave me a second chance. People believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. People believed that I could bring value to the world around me, that my path of spirituality, self-improvement, and service to others actually was lending something to the world. And when people began to see and trust that there was value in me, then I began to see that there was value in myself. Amazing individuals or amazing organizations like the FBI. I'm so grateful to the FBI. They gave me a second chance. I began to work with organizations that allow me to volunteer inside maximum security prisons, helping persons develop skills for entrepreneurism and employment. I was able to start volunteering in a women's unit of county jail and doing that every week for 3 years. The point is, I learned that just because I experience what most people or what many people would label a form of schizophrenia, even to this day, I hear the disembodied voices and I entertain ideas about government interest in my life. That doesn't prevent me from doing something good for the world around me. I might not always be able to control the thoughts of depression or anxiety, but I can certainly control my actions. I can say a kind word. I can send an encouraging text message. I can show up at a place volunteering, helping people. I can do all these things. And what I put out there into the world, and I believe what we put out there into the world, that comes back to us. Society gave me
Absolutely.
a second chance, and I benefit, yes, but society benefits as well.
Right. So this is really interesting. As far as, tell me about your, like, getting to volunteer for the FBI from a point where it sounds like you were going through all these paranoid delusions that the FBI was after you. Is that
Oh yeah,
correct?
no,
Going
no,
to
it's
actually.
global, man. Yeah, no, global conspiracy, and not just the FBI, the Mossad, Interpol, the CIA, the NSA, the Department of Defense. They were all involved. Okay, and this is, this is in my mind, right? These are the delusions that I created. But Toby, this life was as real to me as the conversation you and I are having now. I mean, this is not something like I'm reading a book and I put the book down. This was my life and this was my reality. I believed in these FBI conspiracies. So, basically, after I quit meth, for years, I was very frightened of the FBI. I was sunk into paranoia. I believed they were targeting me. I believed they were following me, listening to me, that they were going to pin 9/11 on me, various things. Eventually, I decided, if I'm ever going to live my best life, I'm going to have to face my fears. At the time, I had been volunteering for the fire department in San Francisco as a first responder. I got an EMT certification. The fire department allowed me to take certain trainings to help them in case the city services were overwhelmed with the disaster. So I was able to take trainings and do scenarios. Uh, from there, at the same time, I had become a Krav Maga instructor. And if you're not familiar, Krav Maga it's like martial arts. It's an Israeli form of self-defense. So Krav Maga is a way I'm improving myself. The fire department is a way I'm serving others. What happens was these two things kind of combined, and one of my Krav Maga students happened to be an FBI SWAT team agent. I made it known to him I wanted to volunteer to face my fears. I made it known I wanted to volunteer for the FBI, like I'd been volunteering for the fire department. He generously arranged for me to lead an unarmed self-defense for the FBI SWAT team. So the very people that I was so afraid were going to come in the middle of the night and kick down my door and drag me away, now all of a sudden I'm their instructor. And this just goes to show the value of facing your fears. You know, it's like Joseph Campbell wrote, "The cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek." Right? When I faced my fears of the FBI, it was a long process. I had to keep working very hard. It's not like one day, boom, the SWAT team shows up at my self-defense Krav Maga studio and then everything's fine. It took years and years, but basically I kept putting myself out there. I reached out to the FBI SWAT team guys. I volunteered to train them. They appreciated my efforts. They nominated me to the selective FBI Citizens Academy, which is a 6-week program, one night a week, where they take civilians, mostly civilians who are involved with public safety or security in the tech realm. You know, in San Francisco, we got a lot of tech. They nominated me. I got turned down for the Citizens Academy. I reapplied. I got turned down again. 3 times I got turned down, even though my sponsor was a senior guy in the FBI SWAT team. And now I'm getting really paranoid. Now I'm like, oh, they're truly messing with me now, the FBI. But I kept persevering, Toby. It just goes to show you the value of perseverance. It turned out the reason I got rejected from the Citizens Academy was mostly administrative matters. It had nothing to do with my criminal history or anything like that. On my 4th application, my 4th time persevering for the FBI Citizens Academy, I got accepted. I was able to assist the FBI conduct outreach to communities affected by incarceration and addiction. The FBI, and by no means do I intend a blanket endorsement of all things law enforcement. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, what I have learned is that there are incredible individuals in the FBI, and the FBI as an organization does many things to support communities that are affected by incarceration and addiction. And the FBI is in San Francisco is truly making positive outreach to these communities. I'm able to assist. And to kind of wind down the story, in May of last year, in May of 2019, I found myself at FBI headquarters receiving a community service award from the director of the FBI. It's one of the highest civilian. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, Ed Kressy, received one of the highest civilian honors the FBI gives for community service from a guy who 12 years ago was lurking the streets high on meth, believing the FBI followed me in invisible stealth bombers. It just goes to show you the value of perseverance, of spirituality, of self-improvement, of being of service to others. They got me from the lowest point of physical surroundings, and even if you can imagine, a lower point in my head. My head was such a dark, terrible place in my mind. Got me to a point where I'm truly able to bring something of value to society. Perseverance, spirituality, service to others, self-improvement, man. These things, when put together and a solid effort behind it, can really make a huge difference in your life.
It's incredible. I mean, that you walk the walk. You don't just, talk the talk. That really speaks bounds, to all the things that you're saying. I got to ask you, now that you've kind of seen both sides of things, I guess, coming from both, being involved in drugs and sounds like, interactions with, the law enforcement, to now sort of working with them. what's your perspective as far as drug addiction and crime, along with do we need to what do you feel about the system where it's at, as far as people who are addicted to drugs, do they need more rehabilitation? Are they treated too much like criminals? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's such a complex issue. Each individual is different. I think for me, the most powerful message is that second chances benefit the receivers, someone like me, yet second chances benefit society just as much, if not more so. And I've seen so many cases. I volunteer inside maximum security prisons in California. I work closely with men who society labels as the very worst of the very worst. These
And
are guys. Sorry?
I'd love to hear more about that. So what is your job, or what are you assisting these men with?
I help coach them. I go in along with a number of business executives and entrepreneurs and very successful human beings. I go in there. I'm not a very successful human being, but some of the people I work with really are. We go in and we coach them. We're part of an organization that delivers training in entrepreneurism and employment and personal development. So we go in and we work with these are men who have been convicted of murder in many cases, who have been affiliated with the Crips, the Bloods, the Norteños, the Aryan Brotherhood. These are guys whom, by their own admission, have made mistakes. But society didn't give a lot of these guys a chance. And just to be clear, in the same way, I don't intend a blanket endorsement of all things law enforcement, because I volunteer with the FBI and the police department. I'm not saying that every person who's incarcerated fits into the category I'm describing, but the men and the women in jail who I work with, who apply themselves, who are working hard to turn their lives around, when we as society give individuals like this second chances, we help them, but we help ourselves as a society even more. These turnaround stories, we all face obstacles. We've all made mistakes. We all, we have all put setbacks upon ourselves and upon others. It's not to excuse our past actions. Well, I don't mean to excuse the crimes that people have committed or that I've committed. But when we apply ourselves to turning our lives around, we have a lot to offer society. And once we've paid our dues, then America, as the land of second chances, really benefits when she, meaning America, provides those second chances. I've seen it time and time and time again. To get back to your question, should we put efforts into rehabilitating persons who struggle with addiction? Should we put efforts into transforming the lives of people who want to apply themselves once they've served their time and once they've paid their dues to society? What I can say is, with my own eyes, I've seen time and time and time again how society benefits when we do these things.
That's incredible. So I gotta ask, what are the biggest things that you've learned, as far as interacting with these incarcerated people who, I assume from all different types of backgrounds? What sort of lessons, or how did you figure out how to communicate and get your message across to these people?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that you're using the term incarcerated persons. These are humanizing terms we try to use instead of prisoners or inmates or felons. So it's great to hear you using the term incarcerated persons. The biggest thing I've learned, I'll tell you, if of all them, and I work very closely with these men, if they had been given the same opportunities in life that I was, they would have turned out fine. I feel these are guys who, when they were 8 years old, opened the front door of their home to see somebody bleeding to death from a stab wound right there on their porch. These are guys who, when they were 6 years old, their dad brought them and shot to death a man right in front of them so their father could show them, the 6-year-old, how it was done. These are kids who, when they were 10 years old, they left their house and then they were surrounded by the street gang, and your choice was either to get stomped or to join the gang. I don't know about you. You might have more strength and fortitude than I did when you were a youth. I would have joined the gang. I live in I grew up in beautiful rural Massachusetts. There was a gang of wild turkeys, outside in the field. But there were not, if there had been a street gang, I would join the gang. The point is, the men I work with, if they'd been given the same socioeconomic opportunities, the same educational opportunities I was, they would have been fine. They would have done better than me. Look how I turned out. I turned out, addicted to drugs. I think to get back to your question, I heard a beautiful story from a man who was serving a long sentence. He was telling me how he chose to view his sentence as a learning opportunity. He chose to become part of a faith-based organization and minister to other men to prevent them from making the same mistakes he did. If a guy can serve a long prison sentence and choose to see his circumstances as an opportunity to learn and grow, then man, I can certainly see my circumstances the same way. There's a guy who served a long stretch in prison. His name is James Stockdale. He was an admiral in the Navy, and he served like 8 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he cites the work of one of the Stoics, and what he says is that we're not troubled by what happens to us. We're troubled by the views we take on it. Right? Or to put it another way, we don't suffer from we suffer from our grief and anger. We don't nearly as much suffer from the things that caused our grief and anger.
Right. Right.
The point being that, our circumstances, they happen to us. We're in the midst of a pandemic right now on May 29th, 2020. We can't do anything about the fact there's a pandemic out there. We can do very little about the fact we're being asked to shelter in place. We can do a little about the fact we got to wear masks and maintain social distancing. These things are beyond our control for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a lot of control over how we choose to view our circumstances.
I love that. Yep.
Yeah, we choose to view at first. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to go back to some, I want to continue on along this tangent as well, but going back to something you said, as far as these, these incarcerated people who've, had very incredibly tough life circumstances, as probably especially as kids, it seems like it's a lot easier for kind of everyone in society who didn't face those sort of hardships to just write them off as bad people, because that's easy. Then you don't have to take into account all of the different factors that cause these people to do, make the sort of life choices that they did. But I think what's so powerful about what you're saying and helping, share your own story is there's always reasons, right? That you do things that you're not, that have gotten you to pretty bad places, and people don't necessarily choose, or they're not necessarily bad people, right from the get-go.
Exactly. Yeah, they've made, and by no means does it excuse the crimes that these men and the women I work with were convicted of. It doesn't excuse their crimes. It doesn't excuse the fact that they victimize people. But what it does mean is just like you say, there are mitigating factors that when we use their experiences, or when we help them use their experiences to transform their lives, they have a lot to teach us. They being people who've served time, who have been incarcerated, who've made mistakes and are turning their lives around. We've all made mistakes. We haven't all necessarily committed crimes. We've all made mistakes. And when we take, when we look at people who've made what we consider some of the worst mistakes, and what they, by their own admission, consider terrible mistakes, yet they're able to transform their lives into bringing benefit and good and even beauty into the world, that gives us incredible inspiration to transform our own past mistakes too.
Absolutely. Well said. So I'm curious, as far as, what are your thoughts as far as what we can do, as a society, to, I guess, mitigate, some of these issues, as far as, do you see the drugs being the problem? Do you see the poverty being the problem, the family situations, or is it kind of a culmination of all these things?
From my own perspective, I was never a violent criminal. I never was, and I always thought that the reason I was never a violent criminal was I made better decisions. Hey, I make better decisions. That's what I really believe that. When I started working with, when I served a little time in jail, and when I started working with incarcerated persons, I realized that the reason I never committed violent crimes was because I never, quote unquote, had to. Okay, meaning when I was dealing cocaine, for example, I was dealing cocaine out of an apartment that my parents were paying for while they were also paying for my college education, right? Had that not been the case, I would have been dealing crack cocaine on the street corner, and I would have probably almost certainly committed violent crimes. The point is, society gave me unfair advantages because of, let's face it, the color of my skin, which is white, and because of my socioeconomic background. I got these unfair advantages. That's the reason I didn't commit violent crimes. Now, Toby, these things sound obvious to say, but it's different when you live them. And the way you live them is, number one, you can live them the way I did, which is very unfortunate for me and due to my own poor decisions. So I don't advise your audience to serve a stretch in jail or to get addicted to methamphetamine. So don't live it the way I lived it. Instead, live it by working with people who have served time.
Right.
Support organizations that help people transform their lives following incarceration. Support the efforts of people who have served their time and paid their dues to society, rejoin society as productive members. You will be helping them, but Toby, ultimately getting back to your question, you will be helping yourself understand the root causes that are at the core of our societies, treating people like me differently just because of my skin color and my socioeconomic background. When you get a glimpse of the true nature of the problems in our society, and to step back, in America, we have a beautiful, wonderful society in many, many ways. Americans are incredible people who've done so many great things through the course of history, yet we still have a lot of problems, and one of them is the way that people like me who are white and privileged get treated unfairly, meaning given unfair advantages. It hurts. It hurts us as a society. And when we better understand that, when we get to know people on a human level who have served time and are turning their lives around, when we connect to that humanity, then we can really understand how much these root problems hurt us as a society. And then we're more motivated and we're inspired to fix those problems.
Right. And I'm curious now, like what are the common reactions, when you share your stories with people, whether that be, just general, the general public writing these articles for the Washington Post or Vox, or, talking to inmates. I'm curious, what are the common reactions that you get? And because I would assume that for a lot of these people, you're showing that, for a lot of these people who may feel completely hopeless, feel like their life's completely over, you know, from your story, they can sort of realize that they can actually figure out some way to contribute to society.
Yeah, the reactions I get are almost all positive. The reactions are all positive from people who read my articles and I tell my work. Now, what I've fallen short at, and it's a serious shortcoming on my part, is I haven't had the tough conversations. I haven't had the conversations with the mother of a murder victim. I haven't had the conversations with the victims of violent crimes whose victimizers I'm working with in prisons. So it's a failing on my part to really go out and put my work out to people who are deeply connected because they are the victims of the crimes.
Is
And
that
they're the
something
people.
you aspire to do in the future?
This is something absolutely I aspire to do because one problem with the work I do, if you can call it a problem, is that it doesn't put enough focus on healing the victims. Okay, we do, and I don't mean to say we don't do that, because when I coach men in prison, a big part of the coaching is how have you reached out to your victims? Have you made amends? Are you in touch with the victims' families? This is part of it, but to me, it's not a big enough part. So as I go forward, this is something I want to do even more of.
That's It's really fascinating to think about. I mean, w- it seems like there's a lot of challenges that, would be presented for people doing that, for incarcerated people reaching out, to the victims. I mean, as far as, even if they, the people who are incarcerated recognize their mistakes, they've had probably years to think and realize all of their mistakes. But what how do they deal with it if there is not forgiveness on the other end, if the victims don't choose to have any sympathy or care about, people changing their lives or apologizing?
I don't know. I don't know. What I do know about forgiveness is that Gandhi wrote, forgiveness is only for the strong. The weak don't forgive. Only the strong forgive. And when I forgive somebody, it makes me stronger. It might not have any, it might help the other person, it might have no effect on the other person, but when I put forth forgiveness, it makes me stronger as an individual. So and to get back to your question, when someone who has victimized a person reaches out to the family or the victim, yes, from my experience, sometimes they won't hear back, or the response will be negative. All we can really do is focus on what we can control. I can control writing a letter to someone I victimized. I can control reaching out to a person. I can control making my amends. I can control making my apology. What comes back at me, I can't always control. In fact, a lot of times I can't control. When we can let go of our expectations, we have a lot of power in life. It's like we were talking a few minutes ago about the current pandemic. We can't control the fact that there is a pandemic or that we have these restrictions placed upon us, but we can choose. We have a lot of choice on how we choose to view our circumstances. So if I
I
write
love
a
that.
letter and I'm speaking as a person who's never victimized someone as a violent criminal, so I'm a little out of my element here. But from having worked with men who have, if I write a letter attempting to make amends, if I make an honest, best effort to make amends, to make an apology, I've done what I can, and if I can let go of the outcomes, if I can let go of expectations, then I've done a lot to help heal myself, and hopefully, ultimately, I've done something to heal the victims as well.
Absolutely. I want to kind of take things full circle here from what you were saying, at the beginning, your kind of childhood passion for writing. I think it's one of the most incredible parts of your story that now you are a published author. You've written articles for, the Washington Post and Vox, as we mentioned. Was that how big of a part of, sort of you feeling like you made it, you made it out?
Yeah. Well, the main thing is, if you have a dream, if you, the listener, the person watching or listening to this podcast, have a dream, pursue your dream. There's an old school motivational speaker named Jim Rohn, and he says that there's two kinds of pain. There's the pain of discipline, and there's the pain of regret.
Hmm.
The pain of discipline is tough because it's right now. I got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I got to write my book. I got to write a chapter, and I got to struggle and pound out a page or a couple pages. That pain of discipline is tough, but the pain of regret can be much worse, and it can last forever. To get back to your question, it's so important to accept that pain of discipline when we're pursuing our dreams. I took things to an extreme. I didn't pursue my dream of being a writer, and you saw where it got me. It got me into drug psychosis and jails and stripped naked, locked up in padded cells in the psychiatric ward. I could go on and on. Those are the consequences of me not pursuing my dream of being a writer. For you, the listener, you're not going to experience consequences like that, probably. But if you don't pursue your dream, if you don't make a meaningful effort to figure out what it is that drives you in life, what it is that motivates you to bring your best self to the world around you, if you don't pursue your dream, you risk putting yourself to consequences, or you risk bringing consequences onto yourself. You don't want to face those consequences. You might not be tomorrow or the next day, or it might not even be a decade from now, and you certainly aren't going to end up stripped naked and put in a padded cell like I was due to my poor choices. But start now, pursue your dream. You will find that the benefits you get from sacrificing in pursuit of your dream far outweigh the pain of those sacrifices.
Mm, mm. I I'm curious. This might sound like a weird question, but when you think about everything that's transpired in your life, are you thankful for the things that you've experienced? Do you still have regrets of wishing you had done things differently, or how do you sort of, what goes on in your head when you're kind of reflecting back on your incredible journey?
Well, I would love to go back knowing what I know now. Absolutely. I'd love to be. I'm staying right now in my childhood bedroom. This is
Mhm.
because I came out here to Massachusetts where I am now, and then the pandemic hit. So I'm staying with my parents. I would love to snap my fingers, be 6 years old again, but still be me and do it all over again. That will never happen. So to answer your question, I would in no way would I roll the dice. I would
Right.
never roll the dice and step into another person's life. I've had so many blessings. I'm able to bring value to the world around me in some small way, like my heroes. My heroes are people like Nelson Mandela, uh, people who have done incredible, who have sacrificed and have brought good to the world. The
Mhm.
Dalai Lama, um, and it goes back to your question before, that do I feel like I've made it in having written my book? Yeah, absolutely. Because whereas my dream was kind of things like I want to be a best-selling author and I want to be doing book signings and I want to be on TV. Yeah, that was my dream. But to pursue my dream at a point where I wrote a book about overcoming drug addiction and serving incarcerated persons and serving law enforcement, to be able to use my book and my dream to bring value to the world around me, that's an amazing thing. And
Absolutely.
it's just funny the way that a pursuit of spirituality takes us along these winding, twisting paths. We don't get there the way we think we would necessarily get there, but we do arrive at some beautiful, wonderful places.
Well
So
said.
yeah, I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade my life, and
Sure.
I am grateful. Yeah, we can't. It's hard to be grateful and angry at the same time. It's hard to be
Right.
grateful and resentful at the same time.
Contradictory.
Yeah, and what I do because of what I experienced as what many people would label as schizophrenia or mental health challenges, I can't always control my thoughts. I can't always. It's like think about being grateful when someone's smashing garbage cans behind you.
Mm.
You can, yeah, conceivably you can do it. I can think, well, I'm grateful that they're not smashing my head, but if there's garbage can lids being banged right behind you, it's going to be hard to get. Sometimes it is like that for me. Sometimes when the entertaining the beliefs or the depression, the anxiety set in, it's hard to control. But I can always control my actions. I
Mhm.
have always the words I say, the text messages I send, the emails, the voice messages. I can always put positive words out there. I can
Was
always do something good. Yeah.
was there a point, was there like a single moment, or was it just a culmination of different things that led you to that realization, from going from a point where you were making all of these, very, poor choices out in the world as far as, what you were doing, but then still having certain of the, delusions, and still battling some mental health challenges, but how are you able to shift from a point of acting out on it to where you're talking about now, where you have the choice of whether you believe or follow your thoughts?
I sought out incredible, amazing people. I worked very hard to do right by them. When I failed at doing so, I got back up again. Incredible, amazing people gave me opportunities to contribute to their lives and their work. It happened time and time and time again. I sought out people who I wanted to be like. I sought out people who were improving themselves. I sought out people who were giving to their communities. I looked for people who found inner peace and pursued spirituality. These people often had material possessions and were successful, and some of them were bordering on celebrities even. But those things didn't matter so much as they were bringing good to the world around them. They were helping others. I wanted to do that myself. So I looked to these people. I worked very hard to put myself close to them so I could see what they did. So I could see how they talk to people, and I could see the words they use, and I could listen to, and I could watch how they appreciated others. And I saw how they gave their time selflessly to helping people. So I did what they did. I said the things they said. I didn't always believe it in my mind. My mind was full of resentment sometimes. My mind, oh, what am I doing? You know, congratulating this person? But I saw what the people I admired did. I saw how they treated others. I treated others the same way. Slowly, gradually, my mind changed. They say it's we can act our way into right thinking, whereas it's more difficult to think our way into right acting. Okay, so
Interesting.
thoughts usually follow actions more easily than actions follow thoughts. So I sought out people I wanted to be like. I did what they did, and eventually I got to a point where slowly but surely, spiritually, and in many ways mentally, I'm at the point where these people are at, which is beautiful and a far, far better existence than smoking methamphetamine and sleeping on the floor of a padded cell after being stripped naked.
100%. Yeah, no debate there. So what's next for you, Ed? What do you see your future? What do you plan on writing more books or sharing your story with more audiences? What do you feel like is next?
Getting closer to God. That's the most important thing. That God, I believe she exists. You know, I don't understand her, but getting closer and closer to God, to the universe, the spirit, whatever the name, she, he, it, whatever. That's always number one. It's like George Harrison of the Beatles said, "Everything can wait except the search for God." Right? George Harrison said that, and the Beatles were considered by many the best rock and roll band in the history of music. So George Harrison is saying even the heights of rock and roll stardom can wait, but that search for God can't wait. So that's ultimately my future. How does that manifest itself in practical terms? I write a newsletter every week. Can I give my website?
Please. Yeah.
Cool. So go to my website if you're listening. It's www.edkressy.com. So www.edkressy.com. You can hit a download PDF button. You can get a free PDF I wrote on suggested ways you can help a loved one who might be in recovery from drug addiction. You'll also get signed up for my newsletter. It comes out every week. It's called Meditations on Meth. It's lessons I've learned about addiction, criminal justice reform, spirituality, mental health. To answer your question, Toby, I'm just sharing my story and the lessons that people have imparted upon me to bring more and more value to the world. I am on the board of directors for, can I say the name of the nonprofit?
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely.
It's called Defy Ventures. They deliver entrepreneur and employment training to currently and formerly incarcerated persons. So I serve on the advisory board for the Northern California chapter. I still work with the FBI, helping their outreach. I'm working with Google. Google has been an amazing supporter of my work. I did a nonprofit for the Wounded Warrior Project. I did a lot of burpees, and you know what a burpee is.
Yeah.
Okay, so Google hosted. So Google has really supported my work. LinkedIn, Slack, Cisco has been an amazing supporter. The tech community out in San Francisco. I'm just looking for, I do some coaching. So people who are struggling with addiction, or I've done a lot of public speaking. I'm not a great public speaker, but I've done a lot of
I
Toastmasters.
don't know about that.
All right. I'm a good coach because I can see, you know, I've learned the value of being vulnerable and telling my story in a way that is intended to bring value so I can coach other people doing the same. So I've really developed an ability to help people become more effective public speakers, and overcoming fear is such a big part of that. I've seen the value in overcoming my fear of the FBI, of public speaking, of many other things. I'm also I'm doing something which really faces my biggest fear, which is I've been reaching out to people directly affected by 9/11. Because I have this whole story of how I like I mentioned, I believed I'd inadvertently befriended a 9/11 hijacker. So I've been having incredible conversations. I talked to a guy who was in the North Tower, the World Trade Center, when the plane hit. And my quote unquote, my hijacker, the guy I knew, he would have been on that plane that hit the North Tower. So the guy I talked to on the phone, he lost like 30 colleagues and friends.
Mm.
He's this amazing individual. We've had one phone conversation, talked on the phone. The point is, I was so full of shame. I was so full of self-loathing because I had these beliefs about a hijacker, and I just felt it's a long story. The point is, I was burdened by my shame. I was burdened by the beliefs I had, having gone into psychosis and about the FBI. Now, as I'm speaking with people who were directly affected by 9/11, maybe I'm helping them in some way, but they're really helping me understand that I can further transform my past into a source of good and value to the world around me. So that's one thing I've been doing recently. I talked to a guy who's a major source of support in the Muslim community in Brooklyn, in the New York area, and I'm seeing how I could possibly help conduct outreach from the FBI. He already works with the FBI, so I'm potentially helping him do further outreach to the Muslim community from the FBI to form bridges of trust and understanding, make society better. I'm trying to learn more about the Muslim community and all communities, all spiritual communities. These are the things I'm doing. Yeah, it's a lot of it's a lot of stuff, but it brings value to my life and hopefully gives back to society.
It's incredible. And Ed, this has been fascinating talking with you, and I really appreciate you sharing, the full story, not no sugarcoating, just the real reality of what you went through and what you were able to overcome and turn it into such, positive ways of affecting the world. So continue sharing your story. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks to you. Thanks to your amazing audience. Very happy to be here. I'm grateful.
Absolutely. And for those of you who enjoyed the show, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're Roscoe's Wetsuit. You can also listen to audio versions of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. So go ahead, check us out whichever way you want. Also on Instagram, we are Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. All right, Ed, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.